Money never sleeps, pal.
Hey there, I'm Pete Townsend, and this is Money Never Sleeps. We look inside the minds of entrepreneurs and at the crossover of startups, enterprise, finance, technology, and life as we know it. This episode of Money Never Sleeps is sponsored by Philip Lee, one of Ireland's fastest growing corporate law firms and expert advisors at the heart of the Dublin and London startup, fintech, and crypto communities. On the show this week, we've got Teana Baker-Taylor.
I'm Teana Baker-Taylor, the Chief Policy Officer at the Chamber of Digital Commerce,
sharing her story on her journey into blockchain and digital assets. In this chat, Teana and I talk through the steps in her career that led her into crypto, her view on the critical focal points for the digital asset industry over the next few years, how she gives back as a mentor and advocate, and her view on what makes a great Web3 founder. All right here on Money Never Sleeps. Hey Teana, how you doing?
I'm great, Pete. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome to have you back on the show. Listen, I've been thinking back to, awesome to have you on the show for the first time. I know we've been talking about this for a little while, but I was trying to think back to when we were first introduced, and that was our friend Colin Platt.
It was Mr. Colin Platt.
Yes, shout out to Colin. So that was when you were coming over to Dublin for the Women in Tech Awards in 2019, the Blockchain Leader of the Year, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yes. I was shocked to win that award. I thought it was just going to be a fun evening with a bit of Irish crack, but it turned out a little differently.
I know. We never did get that pine in, but we will one of these days. And I knew of you before that because I had heard you on an 11FS podcast or two. Always entertaining. Absolutely.
Thanks. Well, I try my best. The 11FS podcast definitely used to give us quite a lot of leeway around how far we could go with some of the banter. So
absolutely.
We'll see how much banter you have today, Pete.
Okay, we'll get into it then. Why don't you, to get us started, walk us through your backstory and how you got to this point? Yeah?
Sure. Okay. So career-wise, I started my career in banking. And originally, like the first kind of big girl job, I was working on IPOs and debt offering roadshows during the dot-com boom, which was a super crazy time in finance for anybody that remembers that period. And for me, it's not completely dissimilar to what's happening now in the crypto space in a lot of ways, really. So working within those deal teams led me to become pretty adept at developing narratives around brand and value propositions. And so when I left banking and I went into hospitality, which was kind of an interesting move, but I was working in kind of marketing and branding completely across the entire sales cycle of a business. So I worked for Hilton for quite a number of years and a number of different departments. And what I learned was, how to talk to many different customer types. I learned a lot about product development, cross-selling, customer segmentation, all of those like really critical kind of building blocks of building any kind of, profitable, successful business. And I was also really fortunate to work on some really huge events and sponsorship activations. Like I worked on a couple of Olympic Games. I worked on a World Cup. So that was pretty cool. And then when I went back into finance, it was originally kind of within the marketing and communications area. But this was a point in time when most banks were looking internally at what they then called their digital money strategy. It's funny to kind of look back and hear that now. Yeah, the digital money strategy. What's that going to be? And so whilst I was at Citi, this was one of the key things that I worked on, not just from, a narrative perspective, but, what did that actually mean? And there wasn't anybody within the bank that was working on that. So I had a lot of scope to kind of figure out what that should look like. And I was in transaction banking. So this obviously includes things like liquidity management and payments, et cetera. So that really led me to get involved in a number of kind of side of the desk and passion projects around financial inclusion. And that's when, I learned a lot about the disparity between, people that don't have great access to financial services and how our current financial infrastructure is really efficient at keeping people poor. And so that's when I learned about Bitcoin. And that kind of started me on the path that I'm on now.
Okay. That's interesting that it was a financial inclusion or not. I got that word's overused, but it's that, hey, wait a second. not everybody in this planet can eat. And I think that there's a stat out there that it's costs you £1,000, pound sterling a year to be poor, right? Because you don't have access to the same type of financial services as most others, and you got to pay through the nose to get it.
100%. Well, and I think too, one of the critical things that happened kind of during that period also was I moved from the US. And so, I was, raised in Beverly Hills. I had what I now see as a very narrow view of kind of the way the rest of the world worked. And when I moved to Europe, obviously I had, a broader scope of experience, but equally, you don't necessarily consider that even within kind of developed economies that, in the UK, we have 1.7 million unbanked people. Now, some of that's by choice, but when you factor in some of the underbanked, which means that, you can't get a credit card for less than, 30% APR, or you can't get a loan to buy a car, to get you to, a mid-level paying job. That it starts to become a lot clearer that the system is broken. And indeed, it's expensive to be poor.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting entry point for you. And was that your first step into this space? Was that with CoinFloor?
Yes. So I left HSBC. I was in a really interesting position there. So I was the global head of client strategy for the transaction banking capital markets and working on a number of different kind of proof of concepts. And I was working across kind of enterprise blockchain. And so there was lots of stuff about the tech that I really loved. But, as you may remember, working for a large financial institution back in the day, it was very slow going. And I had done a few kind of pet projects with the GSMA around mobile money, the Better Than Cash Alliance out of the UN, looking at kind of financial inclusion projects. And the one thing that became really cognizant of is that to develop services to provide better access to the underbanked, for example, it's expensive. It's expensive to develop value propositions and run them unless you have kind of a larger client base that's kind of paying for the innovation to get it off the ground. So one of the things that I learned was that to get some of these projects developed, you needed to have a kind of big flagship client or a client base that was going to pay for the infrastructure build. And that wasn't always lining up. And so I felt like there was a lot of opportunities in blockchain from a technology perspective that could solve a lot of these problems. They weren't mature yet, but the thing that was live and operating in the wild was, crypto specifically.
Yep.
And so I thought, I'm going to make the leap and start working in crypto full time. And I went to CoinFloor.
Yeah, that's interesting because that was kind of my same realization is that I read the Bitcoin white paper. Then a year later, I read the Ethereum white paper and I'm like, this isn't happening within a financial institution. And I'm totally enamored by it and I need to go do something about it. Right.
Yeah, exactly. And it really kind of didn't matter. So when I started at CoinFloor, which is a primarily UK based or UK focused Bitcoin exchange, we worked on a number of different kind of products and launched some pretty cool things. But the role was originally, the chief marketing officer, but, in a tiny company, you do a lot of things. Mm-hmm. So, I very quickly became, our head of regulatory affairs. We didn't have a head of product. So that became something that fell into my remit as well. And so, it was a great opportunity to kind of learn about the space whilst I was already learning about the space, right? So that's one of the key things that drives me nuts when I interview people. And I say, okay, why do you want to work in crypto? And often people will say, because I think it's the future. And I think, okay. And, I really want to learn about this space. And I think, so I started to say to people, why don't you start now? Start learning about this space now. There's a million things you could read or listen to or watch. It wasn't like when I went into crypto, right? Now you're inundated with information. But yeah, so I was learning in real time, but I hopefully was kind of adding to the knowledge that I had built up anyway and putting that into practice.
Yeah. And then you took that into global digital finance. And I remember when that kicked off because I was working with 11FS at the time.
Yeah.
back in 2018, I think. And you did that for a little while, and that then led to the next couple of things that you did, yeah?
Yeah. So what I think has been really interesting about my path is that a lot of things happen simultaneously. And I think that happened just because it was the organic moment in time in the policy evolution of where we're getting to today. So when I was at CoinFloor, the UK government was just beginning to look at digital assets in more depth. And there was a lot of opportunity for the private sector to engage with MPs and regulators at that time. And we took that opportunity really seriously. So I think as a community in the UK as well, we realized that we needed to organize and to start to actively advocate for the industry. And so I was originally part of the founding team that set up Crypto UK, which is the UK's trade body for digital assets. I also drafted written evidence on the benefits of crypto, which led to CoinFloor being asked to give evidence at the House of Commons Treasury Select Committee, which was kind of the main hearings that we were having at that time, which then led to being asked to routinely act as a resource for the UK's Crypto Asset Task Force, which emerged from those hearings. And that was working with the FCA, HM Treasury, and the Bank of England. And then simultaneously, there was a tiny handful of people. I mean, there was 15, 20 of us. And Simon at 11FS was one of them that, we were kind of sitting around talking to each other saying, this ICO thing, I don't know, this is going to be tricky. And, what could the industry do to self-regulate itself whilst policy was being developed? And so that turned into Global Digital Finance, which is now, hundreds of members and a global industry body that advocates for digital assets and blockchain with, bodies like FATF and OECD and IOSCO. So kind of at a global level, looking at cross-border policy and standards for crypto. So yes, I ended up then leaving CoinFloor and running GDF for a couple of years. So it's not your traditional kind of policy background. I do think that the skills that I had from a communications background transferred really well. So, talking to regulators or lawmakers is the same thing as talking to a customer. You just need to kind of tailor your message to that audience.
That's a really interesting point. I never thought of it that way because so many people are just like, oh, I need to go talk to a regulator. I need to be extremely cautious because you can't say the wrong thing. But that's the same thing that happens when you're talking to a customer.
Yeah, well, and if you think about it too, the other thing that my observation as a non-lawyer in this space, and most people that have a job like mine are lawyers, I think I have a very different perspective because I have not been trained as a lawyer. And that's not to say that one is good and one is bad, right? But I do think, when you're trained in that there's a practiced way of thinking, and I have not been trained that way. So I think about things from a commercial standpoint, which is, what's the outcome that I want? And I work backward from there, right? And the whole kind of decision tree, framework around, well, if I do this, then this might happen. If I do this, then this might happen. And then the steps along the way, I would build into any kind of comms plan, right? And so that's the way that I've kind of approached working with policymakers. And I think because I don't go in to these conversations feeling fearful, I go into the conversation feeling practical and pragmatic about trying to get to an outcome that I think is reasonable. I think sometimes my message potentially lands differently.
Okay. That's interesting. And then going from GDF then into what was next, Binance, or actually as some of the folks on the East Coast and West Coast of the US, those that pronounce finance, I've heard them refer to Binance as Binance, and I'm like, that's just so wrong. Okay, don't do that.
I have a good friend that calls DeFi DeFi, even though I've told him it makes my teeth hurt when he does it.
Yeah. I got a good story about someone referring to DeFi as DeFi, and then the feedback he got from someone on that and what that then led him to do. But that's a story for another day. He knows who he is and he knows the story. But anyway, listen, so Binance, I will call it Binance, and then crypto.com, and then leading on to what you're doing right now, and just walk us through that.
Sure. So yes, I led the UK operations for the expansion of both of those companies, Binance and Crypto.com, into the UK and Europe for Binance. And that those roles were really an extension of localizing a global business into a market, a fit for purpose kind of market segment in the UK and Europe. And I think what's critically important about companies as they look to move into new markets and get regulated in those markets. And I think that's where we're starting to see quite a lot of these localization strategies as regulatory frameworks become clearer and or restrictive, right? So in the case of the UK, following AMLD5, the FCA required crypto asset firms to register. It's not an authorization, it's not a license. It's just basically permission to operate, but you have to go through this registration process. And we won't go into that because that's been
I'm familiar with it. I'm familiar with it.
Yeah, a little bit bumpy, that process over the last couple of years. But in both of those roles, my job was to take a global business, boil it down into what was going to be regulatorily, appropriate for the region, look at UI, UX and customize that for companies that originated outside of Europe for a European audience, and really work with policymakers to take those licenses. So kind of set up and the starting of laying the foundation for those businesses to move into the UK and Europe.
Okay.
So super great fun. One of the things I did at Binance was kind of develop a standalone platform similar to Binance US for Binance UK. And I'm sure that will come to market at some point. And that was, something I hadn't done before. And that was really exciting. What transpired during that time, though, too, was a real stark awakening that some of the policy initiatives that I had been working on kind of in theory a couple of years prior we're now translating into pretty onerous licensing and application processes that weren't exactly working, right? And so I think the bumpy start to the FCA registration is a good example of taking something in theory, putting it into practice, realizing that you don't have a methodology from which to evaluate these firms, and then it becoming quite difficult, right, for both parties, the regulator and the industry. And so I kind of just felt like, this was a critical moment for the digital asset industry globally, and that I could kind of use my skills in a way that helped the industry more broadly if I went back into the policy space.
I gotcha. And do you see, talking through this, Teana, kind of see your career in three parts, right? Do you see your role with the Chamber of Digital Commerce, which we'll get to in a minute, as a continuation of phase 3 or as a new phase 4?
No, I still think it's probably a continuation of phase 3, which is kind of, like I said, all happen simultaneously and organically. Yeah, I don't want to commit to phase 4 because I think, there still may be something left in the tank that, might be the phase 4 later on down the road.
Okay. Well, tell us about the Chamber of Digital Commerce and your role there, yeah?
Sure. So the Chamber of Digital Commerce is really the longest established association or trade body representing blockchain and digital assets. It was established in 2014 by our founder, Perry-Ann Boring, with a mission to promote the acceptance and use of crypto and blockchain technology pretty broadly. So today we represent the world's leading innovators, operators, and investors in the blockchain ecosystem. And I think that we are known for, certainly over the last couple of years, have consistently advocated for regulatory clarity for digital assets to allow innovation to flourish, which also takes into account consumer protections and market integrity. And right now, especially in the US, the current legal uncertainty has been really treacherous for market participants. And we're seeing a lot of movement around people potentially leaving the US or setting up operations elsewhere to hedge against potentially policy decisions that may be detrimental to innovation. And, if that continues, I think it has the potential to really harm consumers and certainly the market and innovation overall. So, like I said, I think that we're at a pretty crucial inflection point within the regulatory landscape, not just in the US, but across the globe. But we are starting to see other markets kind of get their arms around this. And I think that the markets that don't are really at risk of losing talent and tax income, right?
Yeah. Hey everyone, this is Pete. Let me tell you about the folks at Philip Lee. A few years ago, I was at my first venture capital industry dinner in Dublin, and honestly, I felt a bit lost. I bumped into Andrew Tizali, one of the partners at Philip Lee. He bought me a pint and introduced me to the team, and they took me under their wing. That take you under their wing approach has been what I've heard consistently from fintech and crypto startups who I know have worked with Philip Lee in Dublin and London to help them wrap the right legal framework around their business, fundraising, and regulatory needs. And I can't recommend them enough. Get in touch with the team at philiplee.ie or on moneyneversleeps.ie/Philip Lee to learn more. Yeah, I was thinking about it this morning. I was listening to a podcast, as I tend to do when I'm out on my walk in the morning, and it was the Tim Ferriss podcast where he had Chris Dixon from A16Z and Naval Ravikant from AngelList. And they're talking about this context of how are different countries going to get it right. And I started thinking about, it's become kind of a common analogy that people talk about 1849 and the gold rush, right? Yeah. Everyone heading west for the riches, right, that are out there. And the most sensible minds are those that are selling the picks and shovels. But I kind of thought about it a bit differently, that it's not really the gold rush. It's more like the 200 years or 300 years from the 1600s through to the early 1900s, where everyone, this massive emigration out of Europe and into the New World, right, into the Americas. And that it wasn't just, hey, I need to go out to California and dig gold. It was that your ideals had been disenfranchised.
Yes.
Bit, right? And that there was a different way to form a company. There was a different way to enable financial services. There's a different way for societies to engage with each other. Let's go do that virtually. Okay. And looking at the US response to this right now, I look at the US a lot differently than I did 20 years ago when I left. And I see it a bit differently on the map. But in thinking about this global context right now of this chaos that we're in, where do you see this going in terms of what we need to get right in the digital asset and blockchain space over the next few years for this to all go swimmingly? Or will it?
Well, I think it definitely can. One thing that I like to remind people, so you have critics that say, well, nobody's using Bitcoin for payments, right? So Bitcoin failed. And my response to that is, you're placing an awful lot of pressure and expectation on the very first thing. In no other industry is the very first, we're not using America Online to get onto the internet anymore. Yep. Right? And that is not to say that Bitcoin will be obsolete. I personally don't think that will ever happen. I think Bitcoin will be here forever. But when you create something from scratch, as Satoshi did, you have an idea of how it can be used, but it doesn't always turn out exactly as you envision, right? And so what we're seeing now is that Bitcoin, for example, is an excellent store of value. Right? If you look at, the return on investment over, the 13 years that Bitcoin's been around, it's very difficult to argue that Bitcoin has not been a good investment. So does that mean that it's a failure because you can't use it as a payment system? I don't think so. And then what we've seen is kind of the evolution of, okay, so, this programmable money is cool. What else could we do? And then, Ethereum entered the scene and then, right? Mm-hmm. And so over time, you would expect, just like we're not using iPods. iPods were the coolest thing in the world when they came out. I remember when I first saw an iPod and it could hold 250 songs. And I thought, oh my God, I have to have that. That is the coolest thing. And I remember at the time it was really expensive, right? This is like 20 years ago.
Yeah, but it was like 25 CDs.
I know.
In your pocket.
But it was like, am I going to spend $600 for that? Because, $600 then is like $800 now. And, it was a lot.
I know.
And it was one of those things that was really cool, but you didn't need it. Right. And it kind of felt the same way when the iPad came out. I was like, I have a laptop. Why do I need this? So some things kind of take their time to kind of permeate. And we're not using iPods with click wheels anymore, right? And so does that mean that the iPod was a failure? No, of course not. It spurred a series of innovations that have led us to having, very powerful computers in our pocket every day.
Yep.
Right? So what's it going to take? I think the one thing from a policy perspective is understanding that innovation does take time. And that means giving it kind of room to grow and breathe and kind of figure out what some of these things are actually going to be used for. And I do think that this period of time, so if I look at kind of this bull market compared to the last bull market that we had, there's a major difference in that the first bull market was really spurred on by speculation, right? Number go up, number go up, number go up.
Mm-hmm.
And, kind of the ICO boom, and then a bit of a correction, obviously. And this bull has been really spurred by building, by innovation, by cool stuff that you can use. And so, if we do enter, I'm not going to say a bear, but, if the market does kind of correct or stabilize, however you want to describe it, all of that stuff that's been built will still be there.
Absolutely.
And that's materially different than the last time. So that's really exciting to me. I think a couple things need to happen for us to really mainstream. One, our communication around why we're here, what we're doing, who benefits, and how needs to be better. It needs to be more consistent. And we need to be able to tell that story succinctly to the press, who influence, the public and policymakers, to consumers and to regulators. And ideally, it would be great if the industry could, and we're better about it today than we were before, but we're still not great. We still have a lot of kind of infighting amongst the industry, and we're just still too small to be fighting with each other, right? So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is, again, the industry has matured around governance and accountability, but we still have things happening in the DeFi space around, like rug pools, and there's still kind of some shenanigans going on. I wouldn't say it's as prolific as it was during the ICO boom. For people to really feel trust in using some of these DeFi protocols, for example, some of this stuff has to stop, or at least be able to be managed for, right? So that these things can't happen. And again, I think we're getting better code reviews, governance mechanisms, et cetera. And then I think the third thing is we need to do what we can do to remove the friction. And that's two parts for me. So, if I'm going to use a DeFi protocol to stake something or to request a loan, end to end, that process has a lot of steps. And it's not easy, right? So if I were to sit down, and I'm not talking about my parents, if I were to sit down and have my brother, who doesn't know anything about this, go end to end and set up a wallet and then a MetaMask and, buy some ETH and then, put it on this platform and, do all this stuff, right? He would probably go, this is too difficult.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to do this, right? So that needs to be simplified. And then from removing the friction from the regulatory perspective, I think we talk a lot about, well, the technology allows us the opportunity to do this and do that and manage AML more effectively and to, incorporate digital identity so, that we don't have to KYC people across all these platforms and really improve the way that we handle governance and AML and KYC in general.
Mm-hmm.
But nobody's building those things to do that, right? So when I sit down with a regulator and they say, well, can't the technology deliver a solution that would do X? And, conceivably, yes, it could. But people don't necessarily want to build those things because they're not sexy and they're not going to make the windfall of cash that something else might make. But, if we had those solutions in place that really did revolutionize the way we handle the prevention of illicit finance.
Yeah, that's interesting because it's like you've got a very talented founder in this space and they're thinking about, will I build a network where I bring together a community and that community is represented in the value of the network and the token that represents the network, and I can build something that is useful for individuals, for people around the world, right? Versus, am I going to build a B2B reg tech on top of crypto, right? Which one is more sexy? I think that's what you're saying, right? Which one feels more aligned with whatever your ideals may be in this space? 100%. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And I think that founders, the best founders build a solution to a problem they've experienced, right? So
Mm-hmm.
at some point, somebody that can code, if I could code, I would build it, right? But I can't. So, at some point, somebody will realize that they have the skills and the passion to solve what is basically an infrastructure problem. But, if you've ever bought a fixer-upper house, your first inclination is to make it look better,
Mm-hmm.
right? But if you start kind of painting and wallpapering and, putting, new floor in, whatever, and you don't fix the plumbing and the floor joists and, the infrastructure pieces, you're building kind of on top of crap, right? And so you don't see it. You don't see the plumbing and you don't see new electrics, but they're integral if you're going to put this investment on top of renovating a house that makes it actually valuable.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I'm kind of thinking of something here that when you look at DeFi and there's no intermediaries,
Mm-hmm.
the idea is trust the code, not the intermediary, right? There is no intermediary. Trust the code. I'm thinking there's something on the horizon which will solve the reg tech of crypto that is trust the code, not the third party. And I think there's something coming there. That's just a guess.
Well, I hope so. And, the trusting of the code, again, when you have a few companies that understand how to run a code audit, for example,
Mm-hmm.
and this is not my area of expertise.
Mm-hmm.
I have heard that, you get in line and it's like a year from now.
Yeah.
It's like trying to get a builder.
Yeah.
We can't get a builder in the UK, and people can't get code review because these people are so busy.
Oh, I hear you. It's like trying to get a painter in Dublin right now. It's ridiculous.
Correct. Yeah, exactly.
We got a new couch coming in and we got to wait for the painter first. And, but that's first world problems. Listen, speaking of founders, like we were just touching on, I know that you are involved in a lot of mentoring and advocacy in general with
Mm-hmm.
Crypto Connect, She 256, Like-Minded Females, Global Blockchain Convergence. What is it that you take from these experiences into your day-to-day?
So a few of the organizations that I am committed to are very specific in trying to create more opportunities for women in tech specifically. So I think that tech has been one of those areas like early finance where for a myriad of reasons that are more sociology related than we're going to get into today, they haven't attracted or haven't necessarily been welcoming to women.
Yep.
And crypto is one of these unique opportunities where everybody's new, right? The industry's only been around for 10 years. There isn't this kind of legacy of, an old boys network or, the way we've always done things. And so I think it is a really incredible opportunity for anyone, but especially for women who may be looking at kind of, changing their careers and using skills that they've built in other areas to get involved in tech or finance, either one, because it's a really nice convergence of both of them. So the time that I spend with those organizations is more about education, what's happening in the space, where the opportunities lie, again, around kind of communication, translating skills, being able to communicate how what you've done before is relevant in this new landscape of decentralized finance.
Totally.
And really also just trying to empower people to feel confident to jump off the cliff, really. I did it. It worked out for me. I see a lot of opportunities in this industry. And I think that, again, people can be a little bit nervous when, we have press that doesn't have a lot of nuance around Bitcoin's boiling the ocean or, Bitcoin's only used for criminal activities, those kinds of things. So people are curious, but they just need more information and education and confidence that the skills that they have will be relevant, and then a little push. So that's kind of what I do there.
Okay.
And then with organizations like GBC and Crypto Connect, they're really focused on, again, kind of engaging with each other. And Like-Minded Females also is around kind of supporting the network that allows you to grow a business,
Mhm.
right? So all of these are around networking and growth opportunities. And I know from my personal experience that, kind of the more people you know, then you're kind of one or two steps removed from maybe somebody that might be able to help you or give you some advice or steer you in another direction or have a different perspective than you might have. And that's another incredible part of this industry, that people are really still open door, right?
Totally.
That's the one thing that I think is super incredible. You can get referred to somebody introduces you to somebody, and they will get on a call with you and, hear your idea or, talk through a problem. They don't know you, but we're all kind of in this together. And so there's this kind of extended community that I think is really powerful. And so things like Crypto Connect are focused on supporting that type of activity.
It's great. It's great. And when you're in this space, and it was the same podcast that I was listening to this morning. Chris Dixon said he's never met someone in this space who is both very well informed and also skeptical.
Yes, very true. So the more you know, I think that the deeper down the rabbit hole you go,
Yeah.
right? So I do think that it is, again, being able to be a resource or providing access to other people who are a better resource than me in areas of expertise that aren't mine is like, I enjoy being a connector because there's so much to learn. There's so much to know. And there's so many niches in this industry, how, people can get involved and build cool stuff. It's great to be a part of encouraging that community to thrive.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's still small enough. We are still early in this space. Just thinking about mentoring in general, as I mentioned to you, I'm leading the Launchpool Web3 Techstars Accelerator here in Dublin. I'm thrilled to be leading it. What do you think are some of the qualities or leading indicators of a fantastic founder in the Web3 space?
So the best founder stories, the ones that have moved me, which, create an emotional story that I think moves customers and, gets people excited about a project, are when a founder solves a problem that they've experienced themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you hear these stories about people that kind of, didn't have access to this or couldn't get that, and they thought, what, screw it, I'm going to go and build it myself. Or people who have, maybe worked in an industry kind of doing things the old way and thought, what, there's got to be a better way to do this. And these people aren't going to let me do it. So I'm going to go and build my own thing and try and fix this from the inside. I think those stories are really powerful.
Mm-hmm.
So from a founder perspective, I think what I would be looking for are people that are really passionate about the problem they're trying to solve, not necessarily the thing that they're trying to build. And sometimes I think that people get their messaging a bit conflated, right? So, my advice for founders is, tell me why this is important to you. Don't tell me about the widget. Like, I actually don't care about the thing that you're building. Tell me about the problem you're trying to solve. Who is this a problem for? Why has it been like this for this, length of time? Like, why does this problem exist? And, what's the upside of solving this problem? And that's how you get people to really emotionally care about your project. And then once that happens, then you kind of engender passion, whether that's from your team or your VCs or your co-founders. And I think that's the catalyst that propels startups into, potentially unicorns. It's the passion piece.
Do you think there is a relationship between how deeply experienced someone is with a problem they're solving and their level of humility as a founder?
100%. Yeah. So I think the other key quality that I've seen with founders that succeed is self-awareness. So, is that always being humble? I think we kind of throw that word around a lot. People like, oh, I'm so humble, or it's important that we hire people that are humble. And yes, humility is absolutely a virtue, but being self-aware and understanding that maybe you're not always, feeling benevolent or humility, and being able to internally manage for that and develop empathy and really kind of lean into being empathetic. I guess having that tool in your tool chest around, self-awareness. Who are you? How are you showing up in the world? How do other people experience you? And then being able to, basically tailor your message to your audience. That's super critical. And I think that a lot of founders, and so maybe this is where humility becomes kind of the nomenclature that we go to, is if you kind of show up and you are who you are in every situation with every audience, you're not going to reach as many people as you might if you can take a step back and kind of look at it from a position of, I'm here to solve a problem. I'm here to be of service. Is that of interest to you? As opposed to, here, I'm solving this problem. It's this cool thing and you should learn about it.
Yeah. No, this was the clincher for me, Teana, of this chat, and that this understanding that being humbled by a problem, so much so that you really want to solve it. You need that knowledge, you need that experience. But if you're solving for X, there's, solving for Y, there's solving for Z and A, B, C, D, E, and F, and knowing which ones you can actually solve and those that you can't, it takes a huge amount of self-awareness. I love that.
Well, and also I think the other key thing that, founders also get stuck into is, somebody asked me this once, pretty recently, actually, when I was talking through an idea that I thought, had some legs. And they said, let me stop you and just ask you, do you want to run this and be the CEO of this thing? Do you want to found this thing? Or do you just want it to exist in the world? And I thought, that is a really good question. And I need to think about that. Because those are two different roles to play. One is more kind of advisory and, strategic and supportive. And the other one is, very operational and, daily doing the grind, right? And a lot goes into where you are, whether it's in your career, in your personal life, people change, right? And so I think you can be a founder that starts a thing and 5 years in exceed your level of expertise. Or, you hire the right people and, it's complementary and you grow together. But I think sometimes people found the thing and then they think that, they have to be the one that kind of takes it to the promised land. And that's not always the case. You don't need to be. Yeah.
Yeah. It's knowing what you're good at, self-awareness. Yeah. And not feeling like you have that pressure on you to take this to a 10-year story. That if there's a point in time where you feel someone else is better suited to do that, there's lots of analogies that come out of the traditional tech space that don't necessarily apply to the digital asset space with this that we could talk for hours on. But yeah, that's critical.
I think so. And I think that it's self-awareness, but also if you go back to the reason that you started this thing in the first place was because you wanted to solve a problem. Solving the problem should be the paramount driver. And so if you get to a point where bringing in someone else or a team of people or doing a merger with someone else, or if solving the problem is your key goal, not, making a bunch of money and being a CEO, then I think those are the businesses that end up kind of transcending what they anticipated, what they set out to do. Because they're mission focused.
I love it. No, that this is you. I feel another mentorship role coming on for you here, Teana. So we can talk about that afterwards, though. Listen, our final question on this podcast is, what is something that people wouldn't expect to know about Teana Baker Taylor?
Something people wouldn't expect to know.
You already told us that you were born in Beverly Hills, and I'm not sure if your zip code was 90210 or not, but.
Well, I was actually born in Washington State, but I grew up in Beverly Hills and my zip code was 90210.
Awesome.
But that's not that interesting, is it?
No, there's something more than that.
I have 4 brothers and no sisters, which I completely attribute all of my resiliency to.
I can see that. I can definitely see that. My daughter has 2 brothers and no sisters. And she is, I will use the word resilient with my daughter. right now. And I'll leave it at that. Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's maybe something, you don't talk about your family, but they've definitely enabled me to keep showing up.
Absolutely. Oh, I totally see that. All right. Well, listen, Teana, thank you so much for coming on to the show today. Really appreciate it. It was great to get into this chat. I feel more of a conversation coming between us after this.
Brilliant. It's great to have the time to chat with you, Pete. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you. That does it for this week, folks. A big thanks to Teana Baker-Taylor for opening up her mind to help us figure out why she does what she does. Links to get in touch with Teana and the Chamber of Digital Commerce are on our website at moneyneversleeps.ie, so check us out online. If you like what you heard, we would sincerely appreciate a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or whatever platform you're listening on, as it helps others to find the show. And remember, Money Never Sleeps is spelled as all one word. Also, thanks to Conan Brophy from Create Sound for mixing and editing this episode. Conan is an excellent media man to get in touch with when you're thinking about launching your own podcast. As for me, I'm an early-stage startup investor and an advisor focused on fintech and digital assets. If you'd like to talk to me about your business, drop me a line on info@moneyneversleeps.ie. Finally, till next time, thanks for listening. See ya!
Money never sleeps, pal.